So I am very fortunate here in this home lab to have access to a building that was wired from the start with Cat 5. Not Cat 5e, not Cat 6, just Cat 5. But at least 2 drops to pretty much every single room in the house, whether they need it or not. That was very forward-looking for 1999 when this house was built. But a lot of people in older buildings don't have access to that same kind of cabling. And even in many newer built houses, they're not even putting any cabling at all, hoping Wi-Fi will come in and save the day like magic. But since moving to Finland, working on my house there, working on that house in Detroit, and working on other people's old houses, I have a new appreciation for how useful it can be to make use of old cabling. In fact, that's why we even have 2.5 gig and 5 gig Ethernet, because offices were built 20 years ago with Cat 5, and now they can't run 10 gig, so 2.5 gig and 5 gig gives them an upgrade path for older quality cabling. But the cable that's pretty ubiquitous in old residential buildings of all types is coax. This is just basic RG6, used to carry cable TV. And since cable TV has been a staple in residential units a lot longer than the internet has, we can find a lot of older buildings that still are pretty thoroughly wired for cable TV. So today, I'm taking a look at a standard that can help us run Ethernet, modern Ethernet, over these old cable TV lines, coax. These little guys here, little SFP module, can do up to 2.5 gig MoCa. So MoCa, Multimedia over Coax Alliance. This is a standard for running modern Ethernet on top of RF. And it uses higher frequencies than normal cable TV, so it doesn't interfere if you do have regular cable TV on the same wire. So if you are one of those people that has old coax in your home and want to put it to use, or you just like watching me find the weirdest SFP modules I can, then come along on this adventure. Quick disclosure, MDSlink sent me a number of their modules free of charge to make this video. I also purchased a number of other coax related components myself. I don't actually have that much coax in my house, so I had to buy some splitters, cables, and I bought a third-party module just to compare and see how it interoperates. So come along on this adventure. So I guess my journey starts off today in the wiring closet. So as you guys may know, this house has like 40 different drops of Cat 5. Now these are Cat 5, not Cat 5e, not Cat 6. They still work pretty well. I've got them all patched up here. I got a couple of videos on that separately. But this house also had coax, and there's 1 to every room, well, 1 to every bedroom. There's like 2 to the kitchen. Some of them aren't visible anymore. As we've replaced wall plates, we didn't put the coax in them. We just put the RJ45s. But the wires are there. Unfortunately for me, though, I actually cut them all off a few years ago because they were a huge mess and they were all different lengths. So I cut them all to the same length, and now I'm slightly regretting that because now there's no ends on them. I didn't have ends on them before anyway, but I guess I'll have to crimp some ends today. So I'm going to try to get Ethernet running over this coax in this house. This is RG6, the kind of stuff you probably still install today. It's like a 50-year-old standard or whatever. So I got 9 of them in these little boxes here. They kindly wrote on them what bandwidth they're all set to. So I've got some that are low frequency, some that are high frequency. They're just a standard SFP form factor. So if I take this nice guy here, I can just pop it in there. There we go. We got MoCa in an SFP slot. So I flip it over, push the little retaining tab, pop it back out. This one he said is low frequency, so I'll get to what that means later. But basically I have all of these guys here that are not currently being tested, so I can build out quite a few networks with these. So these guys follow a standard called MoCa, Multimedia over Coax Alliance. This is a standard that came about, I don't know, 20 years ago, something like that. It was originally intended for like set-top boxes to talk to each other over their coax lines, but it became very useful just for sending Ethernet over coax. So a number of cable companies now, Comcast, etc., have MoCa built into some of their gateway models, especially because many of their own set-top boxes now use it to get to the internet, as it was intended, I guess. But that doesn't mean you can't plug in your own MoCa device to a coax network that has MoCa running and get your guys on the same network up and running. So I mentioned earlier this one has an L on it. None of these have an L on it because I'm testing them, but what does the L mean in this case? So the standard MoCa frequencies, 1.1 to 1.5 gigahertz. Those are what are used by most commercial MoCa products. However, MDSlink has another set of units that operate on lower frequency. I think they're around 400 to 800 megahertz, something like that. I guess I'll check on Spectrum Analyzer later. But basically, that's how you get more bandwidth out of the system. So you can essentially run two MoCa networks on the same set of coax, the high frequency network and the low frequency network. So I have a 2.5 gig module as well, and this one can do 2.5 gig. So what is that? So for the 2.5 gig module, this one does support 2.5 gig, full 2.5 gig. It's again not full duplex because MoCa only supports 2.5 gig shared, but you could do like 2 gig down, half gig up, or whatever you need for acknowledgements. This will do that. Now this one in particular requires an SFP slot that supports 2.5 gig, which not all my equipment does. So I in particular have a Mellanox 25 gig card there. I couldn't get to run in 2.5 gig mode. This one won't negotiate down to 1 gig. You have to have one of the 1 gig modules. So that's why he sent me some 1 gigs as well. Now if you buy like MoCa adapters off the shelf from other companies, you can get them with 1 gig or 2.5 gig Ethernet jacks on them. So back to my setup here. Hopefully this isn't too hard for you guys to see. I'm in a really cramped closet. So I've got my 2.5 gig adapter hooked up here. This is the high frequency model. So it's hooked up to my Sirius 328. It's in a 10 gig port, but I've forced the port down to 1 gig, so we're not auto-negotiating. Down on the Sirius 312, I've got one of the low frequency models, so I can try both of those at the same time. And that's only a 1 gig. And that one is, again, in one of my 10 gig SFP Plus slots. I also forced this guy down to 1 gig. In some of my equipment, it'll auto-negotiate 1 gig. This particular switch did not, but it was easy enough to force. So we got these two coaxes coming out here. Step out of the way. Don't know if you can see this well, but I got a 3-way splitter here. So I got my 2 MoCa adapters going into the splitter, and then I'm coming off of that to an RTL SDR dongle, so you can see the spectrum. So I got that hooked up, and then I'm hooked up here to a coax that goes upstairs. So I mentioned earlier I kind of cut all these wires like 5 years ago. We did used to have a TV in one of the upstairs bedrooms, so that line did not get cut. It got recrimped nicely. So I'm using that line to go upstairs. So this is the bedroom. I took the TV down off the wall to find the old coax. Still here, still crimped. Of course, we use Ethernet now with an Apple TV, but coax is still here. So I got this hooked up to a splitter, 2 coaxes that run over to a table over there, so I can do some testing. Okay, so I'm up here. I got one of the 2.5 gig modules. It's plugged into a port on this low-cost Sodola switch from Amazon. So this guy's got 2.5 gig Ethernet. It's hooked up to my laptop over 2.5 gig Ethernet. So we had 2.5 gig on the Fi to MoCa, 2.5 gig to my laptop. Downstairs, I have a similar setup, but it's hooked up to my Proxmox system where I'm running iPerf server. And we're doing 2.32 gigabits per second all day. That is, of course, what I would expect. So I flip over to the spectrum analyzer here. We can see lots of stuff going on. It looks pretty happy to me. I'm not an RF wizard, so I don't want to pretend how MoCa works under the hood. It is kind of like radio waves over the air, except they're confined to the coax cable. So we're still doing the same RF magic we would do over the air. We just have a bit better propagation medium over this coax cable. Now I did have a couple problems, so I'm going to go back downstairs and tell you what problems I had and show a bit more of a complex setup down there. So, as promised, I got 2.5 gig working over the cabling already in my house. Great. But I had a couple issues. 2 issues that I expected, 1 issue that I didn't expect so much. So let's talk about that. But first, here's sort of the bare minimum setup, so we can see a look at that. So this is essentially the setup I was running before. I have this switch made by Sodola. So these are 2.5 gig Ethernet ports. These are 10 gig SFP plus. This guy here is a direct attached cable going over to a test system at 10 gig. Then I'm running over a whole bunch of coax to another one. Same exact setup, except I'm using 2.5 gig Ethernet on a USB adapter into my laptop. And again, over iPerf, 2.31, 2.32 gigabits, so that's exactly what I expect. Now the troubles I had involved low quality splitters like this one, low quality cables, not this one in particular, but low quality cables, and surprisingly, SFP slots for 2.5 gig. So the first issue I was entirely expecting. This house was built in '99, so the splitter here, there's like a 10-way splitter or something here. It's rated for 900 megahertz. That's perfectly fine in the days of analog television. That probably never was fine for satellite television, but especially not for modern satellite TV that goes over 2 gigahertz on the wire. And it's not sufficient for MoCa. So MoCa consumer class products use what MoCa calls the D band, I guess, or the D frequency range, which is from like 1.1 to 1.6 gigahertz. So that's obviously more than the 900 megahertz of my splitter. The splitter will filter off as frequencies get higher, so it doesn't really work. That's fine for low frequency stuff, which I'll test in a little bit, but not good enough for these. So here is a splitter that did work for me. It says MoCa 2.5 right on it, so it's 5 to 1675, so that fully encompasses the MoCa frequencies. This one worked very well for me. I also have one other one that did work for me. This is a satellite splitter, so it's 10 to 2620 megahertz. So this is well into the 2 gigahertz range. For satellite stuff, this one also worked pretty well for me. Now the other problem that I entirely expected was low quality coax cables and connectors. So this guy here, many of the ones I'm testing with, these are RG6. RG6 requires at least a double shield. It's a 75 ohm coax with an 18 gauge center. Very common cable. RG6 should work just fine, and it did for me. RG11 is a lower loss version that's usually used outdoors or for long satellite runs, things like that. That should also be perfectly fine. I have one of those that goes out to my garage. I don't want to deal with terminating it because I did a bad job last time. Get to that. RG59 technically is a 75 ohm coax that should work. I don't have any RG59 to test with. I expect it would probably work a little bit, but I wouldn't try to rely on it. The biggest problem I had, though, was not my RG6 in the wall. That was all fine, even though it's 25 years old. It was the crimps I did. So I did this crimp many, many years ago, and I did a pretty bad job. So feel free to judge me for it. I am not a coaxial crimper. I struggle a lot on this. I'm not going to cut it off and redo it, but I had to wiggle it a little bit to get it to work right at MoCa. Now, with MoCa, MoCa is very tolerant of bad cabling, but you will get much more degradation in throughput. So when I wiggled that connector there, I went from 2.32 gigabits per second down to as low as 500 megs, maybe even less. And maybe that's fine for you if you're trying to run cable out to like a barn or something, but I wanted the full 2.5 gig experience, 2.32 gigs, layer 3, and I got that by wiggling the connector. So if you have problems, definitely check your cabling, check your splitters, check your terminations. All of them make a much bigger difference for MoCa than they would for analog television or even digital television. So one of the biggest struggles I had for the 2.5 gig stuff specifically was finding switches and equipment that worked with 2.5 gig line rate. So I have two switches in here that should both support 2.5 gig. So the CRS328 should have 2.5 gig SFP plus, and so should the CRS312. Now right off the bat, the CRS312 wouldn't link. It would just sit there trying to initialize the SFP and fail. The CRS328 would link and pass data, but at high traffic rates it would drop a lot of frames. So I'm not sure why. I'm no idea what's wrong, but switching to the low-cost Sodola switches fixed that. Now as for network cards, I have a Mellanox Connect X4 that I use for a lot of my 10 gig testing. That's a 25 gig card, and that card flat out would not let me set 2.5 gig as an option. So it could do 25,000, 10,000, 1,000, 110. No 2,500. It just rejected it. I'm still trying to dig out my Intel X520, but I don't have high hopes for that one either. But if it does work, I guess I'll show it to you later in the video. That said, both of these guys work fine with the 1 gig modules. So if you're using them with 1 gig, like you're trying to get more symmetric bandwidth than just trying to push a high speed test, these work fine for that. MDSlink did say they tested with a CRS305, which I actually have, and I love that switch. It's my favorite switch. But I left it in Finland because it's a key part of the network there now. So I won't be able to test that for you guys today. But SFP compatibility with 2.5 gig was definitely a struggle for me. I'm not sure what was up with the CRS328. Just wasn't happy. One other problem that didn't end up being a problem is that on these guys, the SFP cages are really close together. I'll put some B-roll in here with that. And I actually can't fit more of these MDSlink modules side by side. They fit fine in like the CRS305, where they're a little bit further apart, in the Sodola switches, and in the Connect X4, but not in this one where the cages are right next to each other. So just something to be aware of. F connectors are kind of big compared to fiber connectors, so it is what it is. It's not getting any better. Sorry about that. So next up, I got one of these low-speed modules. Same Sodola switches before. On the other side, though, I'm using a TP-Link MC220L, so this is just a completely off-the-shelf MIDI converter. So this works fine at gigabit. I don't have one of these at 2.5 gig. And this is again connected to my laptop. And laptop is again doing 930 megabits a second, which is exactly what I'd expect. Something I mentioned earlier, there's a couple different frequencies that MoCa can run on. All of the commercial off-the-shelf stuff you buy on Amazon is all going to be doing the D frequency ranges. These are 1.1 to 1.6 gigahertz. That's what the high frequency stuff, the 2.5 gig stuff, that all uses that frequency range. So it should interoperate just fine with that equipment. On the low frequency stuff, there's a couple other frequencies supported by MoCa. There's the frequency they call the E range. So that's like 360, 380 to like 600 megahertz. That's what I'm doing here. There's another frequency range that's F. It's like 600 to 800 megahertz, and a couple other smaller ones scattered around that different people use for different things. So if you're doing like this kind of network in like a multiple dwelling unit, where you're trying to get more bandwidth than just 2.5 gig, you could potentially use the lower frequencies as like a sort of second network. So both of these running over the same coax. Maybe like a setup, say like this. So I got the low frequency and a 2.5 gig high frequency module hooked up to the switch. And same setup on the other side, except on the other side I've got 2.5 gig going in here and 1 gig going into this. So they're going to two different iPerf servers, and then I only have 2.5 gig to the desktop, so I can only do one test at a time. And of course we're doing 930 again over the low frequency. Excellent. And of course I can test with other MoCa products. Hitron is the one I got here from Amazon. This is just a standard gigabit unit, so I got hooked up with a cable to my splitter. Got 2.5 gig over to an iPerf server. This one's got 1 gig to an iPerf server. And I again have 2.5 gig to my laptop. So over on the laptop, I can connect to this server here. We should get 2.3 gigs, which we do. And then if I switch over to this server, I should get 1 gig, which again, I do. So this was just one that came to me off Amazon, sort of recommended by MDSlink. It is made by Hitron. There are other ones available on the internet. In particular, like I think Frontier Cable has a bunch of like branded ones that are for sale on eBay super cheap. Someone on my Discord pointed me to. I don't have any of those to test. This is just a basic 1 gig one, but it's working fine for me. So happy about that. MoCa is of course a standard, so I would hope these devices do work with each other. I'm also kind of getting the feeling that there's only one company that actually makes MoCa like chips, since they all seem to have the chip. Who makes that chip? MaxLinear. I think they're all made by MaxLinear. I'm not sure. The comments are welcome to correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's what seems to be happening so far. And since I'm sure a bunch of you are wondering what it looked like when my MikroTik switch didn't work, so you know what to look out for, I got this thing hooked back up into the Cirrus 328. Let's take a look at Winbox. So I'm just going to start a super long iPerf test here. This will just kind of go forever. So I'm only getting like 500 megabits, which is not great. So over here in Winbox, I'm on SFP plus 4. See, it's showing up as MDSlink. I have forced it to 2.5 GBase X. RX stats, I mean, packets are flowing, and I've got one error of each type over the course of like 1 billion packets. And it's not showing any errors here, so I would expect errors, and there really aren't any. And same with drops. So there's nothing causing it to drop packets coming into the switch. It's something else going on. Okay, so MoCa. Would I deploy MoCa or not? And would I use these neat little SFPs from MDSlink to do so? So MDSlink advertises these guys as being for multiple dwelling units. So think apartment buildings, hotels, dormitories, things like that. You have a lot of people, they have small rooms, the buildings are probably older, and they probably have cable TV infrastructure. That's who MDSlink is trying to sell this to. And for that customer, I think this is perfect. Maybe a bit more explanation. If you're in a building that already has RG6 coax in the wall, or RG11, this is a good solution for you to get faster than Wi-Fi, or whatever you're getting over your old phone lines. Now, if you have the option to go fiber, obviously you would probably want to do fiber instead of this. And if you have the option to do like 10 gig copper, if your copper is capable of that, you probably want to do that also as well. It's going to be easier and cheaper on you than this. However, if you don't have those options, and your only option is wireless, or Cat3 or something that's not going to do more than gigabit, Cat5 should be able to do 2.5 gig. 5E should be able to do 2.5 gig for sure. If your cabling is long enough that you're not able to do 2.5 gig, you're stuck at 1 gig, or even lower if you only had 2 pairs, for example, this would be a fantastic upgrade for you. If you're in a building that's brick, you can't run new cabling, again, this would be a fantastic upgrade for you. If you're in a home where you rent and you can't run your own cabling, again, this is probably for you. If you're in a new building, or you're building a new building, you have the option to run fiber instead, absolutely run fiber instead. Fiber will be way more future-proof than this. But MoCa 2.5 is a real standard that does work pretty well if you have good splitters, good stuff like that. Of course, I, again, struggled like crazy with these splitters, with the cabling, with the bad crimp I had done 10 years ago. All of those were hurting my performance. However, it still worked. I still got signal through this thing. And even on a bad day, I was getting like 400 megabits through this with bad cabling. So even if you do it wrong, you're still going to get something that works, and it's probably more reliable than your Wi-Fi. But if you do it well, you can get 2.5 gig and be very happy. Now, as for using 2.5 gig or low frequency or things like that, I found my low frequency network was like absolutely bulletproof. I was getting 900 megabits per second, 930, whatever that is, the layer 3 rate of gigabit, day in, day out with all of my bad problems. The low frequency network was very happy. The high frequency network was very sensitive to all of those problems. I think a lot of that's because analog TV ended below a gigahertz. So a lot of that equipment was not designed to handle high frequencies and has much more attenuation at those frequencies, which totally makes sense, but it means that running off-the-shelf MoCa 2.5 with the gear you buy on Amazon, on eBay, that uses the D channels is going to have a much harder time than these low-frequency ones running on the E channels. I don't know what the price difference is. Someone else can comment, I'm sure. One other thing, these guys don't have a 2.5 gig option yet. I'm not entirely sure why. Jim said it was related to the filters on this, not supporting all the channels or something like that. MoCa 2.5 bonds a bunch of 100 megahertz channels together to get 2.5 gig. So I think it bonds a bunch of 5 of them. So this one can't run all 5 channels for some reason, filter reason. So that's presumably why they don't have a 2.5 gig version yet. This one is running all 5 channels, seems to be doing just fine. So if you need 2.5 gig, you're going to have to use the D channels, at least for now. Also, if you're part of the Unifi Bling Club, and you cannot tolerate having a box that looks like this on your network rack, then again, maybe one of these on your network rack is for you. And then maybe you want to use these boxes or get some of the used ones on eBay if you're like a home lab user, that kind of thing. If you're a professional, you can definitely afford these. These are not that expensive. They're only slightly more expensive than these, at least from what I know so far. Now, they don't have a listing like on Amazon. You have to email the site. So I'll have the email down, link below for that. What else? Oh yeah, if you want to chat with me more about MoCa, I had a great chat about MoCa with my Discord server because I was driven absolutely crazy by that issue with the CRS328, and they helped talk me through it. So my Discord server, very supportive. Link down below for my Discord server. If you want to buy one of these guys, have the contact info for MDSlink down below. I thought these were really cool. These are going in part of my like weird SFP module series. So I like anything that fits in an SFP slot. I think this is very clever. Is it actually superior to a product like this? It's probably about the same functionality-wise. It's just a different form factor. And if this SFP form factor is going to help you fit more of them in, fit in the Unifi Bling Club, etc., then maybe this particular unit from MDSlink is what you need. What else? I have a Ko-fi. If you're interested in giving me tips, like monetary tips, I always appreciate those. It's sort of like a Patreon, but it's only a one-time thing, so thanks for those. And also, I am on Mastodon, which is kind of like the Dead Bird site, but not a bird. And yeah, you can find me there as well. Link down below for that. I've got many more things planned coming up while I'm in the US. So I'm in the US for currently planning on like 2.5 more weeks. So I've got a couple other things that have been shipped here. More on the Weird SFP module series. Also, if you have any leads on Weird SFP modules, I am always into Weird SFP modules. Anything networking related that's more odd. I love odd things. So I got some of that coming along in the pipe. I got this coming along in the pipe, which you have to guess what this is. And yeah, I think that's it. So I guess I'll see you guys in the next adventure.